know when we're live.
If we're going to say something, then I'm not sure he would
You're good.
see us how.
I'm know that, yeah. We've talked about it, and the chair's kind of given permission because he can't see us sitting here very well.
You're live.
Okay, we have a quorum and we're good to go, Chair.
Now it's 7:01 and I'm going to call this Transportation Policy Board meeting to order. It's Wednesday, December 14th. Let's start with some introductions. I'll turn it back over to you, Mark.
All right, why don't we start with you, Chair?
Mayor Andy Ryder from the City of Lacey, and I'm the Chair of the Transportation Policy Board.
And City of Olympia.
Good morning, everybody. Danny Madrone with the Olympia City Council.
And Thurston County.
Carolina Mejia, Board of County Commissioners.
City of Rainier.
Good morning, everybody. Ron Kemp, City of Rainier City Council.
And Tenino.
John O'Callaghan with the Great City of Tenino.
Inner City Transit.
Don Melnick, Authority Member, Inner City Transit.
And Washington State Department of Transportation.
Gaius Sonoy, Olympic Region.
And our business representative, Jessica.
Jessica Jensen, Cap City Law Business Representative.
And business representative, Renee.
Renee Radcliffe Sinclair, Business Rep.
And business rep, David.
Yes, Dave Wasson, business rep, Dancing Goats Coffee.
Our emeritus rep.
Hi, Pete Kamat.
Here in the room with us. Our community representative, Michelle.
Michelle Murray. Hi.
And community representative, Travis.
Morning, Travis Millar, Community Representative.
And that is who we have for members so far, Chair. Oh, there's another page. Let me make sure. Yes, it is. And Katrina Van Every will introduce staff for us.
Good morning. In addition to Mark, Karen Parkhurst, and Dorinda Merrill are in the conference room. Other staff that we have are myself with TRPC, Paul Brewster, Berlina Lucas, Veronica Jarvis, all with TRPC. We also have Ann Freeman Manzanares from Intercity Transit, Eric Phillips from Intercity Transit, Jessica Gould from Intercity Transit, Martin Hoppy from the City of Lacey, Matt Unselman with the Thurston County, Michelle Swanson with City of Olympia. We have Rob LaFontaine with Intercity Transit, Sophie Stimson with the City of Olympia, Theresa Julius with TRPC. And I believe that is it, unless anyone else popped in.
Great. Do you have any announcements, Mark?
I do, a couple. So I wanted to provide the policy board with an update on the council discussion around the letter that was sent out to both the Transportation Policy Board and council, a draft letter in opposition to citing an airport in Thurston County per the vote of Transportation Policy Board at your last meeting. Council had a pretty lively discussion on this. Where we ended up is that some of the council members needed to take the letter back to their organization before they felt that they could vote on behalf of their organization. And so it is will be on the agenda again for their January meeting, where they're expected to take a vote on whether or not to submit that letter. And I'm going to pause there just in case there are any questions on that. Okay. Also, I just wanted to say we found out earlier this week that the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission was hosting 3 listening sessions. Unfortunately, at this point, there's only 1 remaining. We didn't hear about this from the beginning. But they have no presentation at these listening sessions. They're simply an opportunity for people to log on and tell the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission what they're thinking, what individuals are thinking. And so the last one is today from 4:30 to 5:30. And if you just type in Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, you'll get to their page. There'll be a link to that listening session if anyone is interested today in logging in and providing feedback. Again, that's 4:30 to 5:30 online today. And lastly, it's a good time of year to remind folks that Thurston Regional Planning Council, we are the commute lead agency for commute trip reduction for the Thurston region. And for those that are newer to the policy board, the commute trip reduction law at the state level directs that all major work sites with 100 or more employees, and in Thurston County, for state agencies, it's agencies of any size, but that they have a program. All those agencies are required to have a program in place to encourage employees to travel to work in ways other than in a car by themselves. And so it includes transit, walking, bicycling, ride sharing, telework, all the forms of alternate ways to get to that work site. And each year, we've got about 180 work sites in our region that submit a final report on summarizing their activities over the year. And so we've just compiled that final report for this year of all of our work sites, and wanted to provide a reminder to policy board members, because it's a good time to check in on your organization, take a look at that final report and reacquaint yourself with what your organization is doing in support of commute trip reduction. And if you've got any questions on that, Veronica Jarvis, our coordinator for that work, is happy and eager to help always. Oh, there she is. Give us a wave, Veronica. Thank you. So don't hesitate to reach out. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
So Mark,
Yes.
I'm having really bad internet connections. I'm having a really bad internet connection, and so I barely heard any of that. I'm not sure if what's going on, but I might need to log in and log back out or something.
Okay, looking at this. Oh, sorry.
This morning on mine for some reason.
Yeah, looking at the screen, Mayor, I do think it's on your end, so that might be wise. Maybe you could pass the virtual gavel over to Danny Madrone for a moment.
Yes, I will pass the gavel to Danny and log out and log back in, see if that works.
That sounds good. And so just one thing, Danny, before you take a vote on the agenda, we do have a request to move the high capacity transportation update to the first other business item. So we're hoping to entertain a motion to approve the agenda with that change.
Yeah, excellent. So would somebody like to move to approve the agenda with the change that will move the high capacity transportation update up to the first item?
Okay.
It sounds like we had a first and a second. I saw Ron Kemp and Jessica Jensen both put their hands up. Who wants to be first? Who wants to be second?
I defer to Ron.
All right, excellent. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Any opposition? All right, well, we've got an agenda in front of us. Do we have anybody who has signed up for public comment?
We did have one.
Oh, I apologize. I missed the consent calendar here.
Oh, yes.
We actually need a motion to approve our meeting notes from November 9th. Would somebody like to make that motion?
Don Melnick.
Excellent. Second? Anybody want a second?
Second, Renee.
All right. Any discussion on the meeting notes? Any corrections? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, now we're good to go for if we had anybody signed up for public comment.
We did have one person, Kingsley Clifford, but I'm hearing that that person is not
Right.
in attendance.
Is on there. She didn't register.
Okay.
This morning, so.
All right. Well, with no public comment, then let's go ahead and move on to this high capacity transportation update. That's
Thank
you,
you,
right,
Chair.
Veronica? All right,
Yeah,
excellent.
it is. And I really appreciate you accommodating me switching around. I have some kids I have to get to school, and the other time was right at that same time, and I couldn't quite make it work. So I really appreciate it. So I have the high capacity transportation projects in front of you, and I say projects because we have done a phase 1 and we're just in the beginning of phase 2. So phase 1, next slide, please. Yeah, I just wanted to give you guys sort of like a where we've been and what these projects are. The phase 1 was a roadmap of high capacity transportation in our region, and phase 1 used federal and local funds. And now we're in phase 2 of the project, which after some discussion with the legislature, they were interested in us continuing this work. And so this is legislatively directed, and it's using state funds. And for both sections of the project, we have used Fair and Peers as our consultant for a majority of the tasks. And specifically in phase 2, TRPC is going to be doing some of the project management and stakeholder outreach for this. But generally, Fair and Peers is going to be doing most of the travel sheds and rideshare numbers, things like that, looking at our region, getting all the data. And I want to just pause here before I start talking too much about high capacity, about the 2 specific projects, and just talk about how our region has responded to the high capacity transportation we have. We currently have Amtrak Cascade service that serves Olympia Lacey out at the station out on Yelm Highway, and then we do have our buses to Lakewood, and those are well used. And I just want to remind everyone that people are using the options we have right now, and people wanted those so badly, specifically the Amtrak station. That wouldn't have come together without a huge community effort and an effort by Interstate Transit, by WashDOT, by so many community partners. I'm just trying to remind everyone that it wasn't an easy lift to get the things we have now. So I just want to frame it a little for what we may have in the future. Next slide, please. So I wanted to at least provide some information on phase 1 of the study. And I came in at the end of this study, so I do have some friends I can phone in here on the line that can provide answers if you guys do have questions more about phase 1. But I've included here the highlights from our consultant, Fair and Peers, on that, and they're on the line today too. But was there something I thought okay. So the highlights from phase 1 are that between Thurston and Pierce counties, there is a market for HCT with boardings of about 2,500 to 4,000. And this level of boardings would support enhanced express bus and enhanced carpool van pool services. And I'll get more to that later on what levels of boardings and levels of population and density support which type of services. And with our current growth projections for the region, it doesn't look like we'd be competitive for commuter rail or services like light rail at our current projections. And this is really coming mostly from a funding perspective of what we think could get funded from both federal and state dollars. The options we do have now, the express bus, the van pools we use, carpools, those are limited by the lack of HOV lanes on I-5 in our region. We also have some barriers related to who funds the current bus service we have to Pierce County. That's funded through Interstate Transit, through state grants, and Pierce Transit no longer funds the service, so it's through Intercity Transit. And another highlight from the phase 2 or phase 1 work is just really that now is the time to figure out how we want to move forward for the region, and figure out who the coalition is to do this work, so we can have a plan for the future, rather than just trying to go for whatever funding or think of whatever option that looks shiny at the time. So one very clear finding from phase 1 was that the findings really support implementation of HOV lanes on I-5 between DuPont and Tumwater. That would help any of the options that we go forward with in the future. Next slide, please. And just a little bit of why we're doing this study, why the legislature thought it was important for us to continue this work. And it's to get those potential costs of what commuter and light rail would be in the future when developing any other modes for the region, and from a cost and ridership perspective, sort of when it makes sense. You know, right now, since we don't have the density and the people, it would be very, very expensive and very cost prohibitive for a per rider or per person in our county. So further identifying the travel sheds for the different modes, and identifying which high capacity transportation modes to evaluate, and also just what will work best for our region. They're going to look at other regions that have a similar character to ours, and density, and sort of suburban nature, and look at what has worked in those regions. Next slide, please. And I really want to call this out because I want us to remember that this is a huge part of our travel shed, is that we have a dense population in Olympia, Lacey, a little bit in Tumwater, and then we have a dense population in Tacoma and parts of Lakewood. And then we have Joint Base Lewis McChord in between that, who there's a lot of people, but they're very spread out on the base, and they're going all sorts of different places. But I wanted to point this out. I used the work from the South Sound Military Community Partnership transportation study on this. But I think it's just important to see that, 20% of those folks that go to JBLM come to the Lacey and Olympia region. And when you add that with the 12% down below that goes south of Nisqually and JBLM, to communities, to Rainier, Yelm, Tenino, Tumwater, those sorts of things, you really get a pretty significant portion of the Joint Base Lewis McChord commuters are going to our area. So I just wanted to put that out there as a reminder of some of our larger commuters, and how they're a little tougher to serve, because even if we put a rail stop right in front of JBLM, it would still be challenging to get them around the base. And as many of you are familiar, there are quite a few entrances and exits to JBLM. It would be challenging to pick one and put all the commuters into one place. Next slide, please. So this is what I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about with the density, and I'm happy to take questions on this at the end. And if necessary, I think our consultant could chime in if you have questions. But something we'll explore a little in phase 2 that really came out in phase 1 is that we don't have the density currently or projected into the future to make that commuter rail and light rail make sense for our region. We have some corridors of density along Harrison, Martin Way, that area of Olympia, Lacey, and into Tumwater along Capitol Way, where a lot of state buildings exist. But we just don't have the general density to support that commuter rail and light rail. And between Thurston and Pierce counties, we just don't have the total employee population based on the census numbers that would support those higher capacity transportation modes. And what we do have is things that might work like more frequent bus, more bus rapid transit, more van pool, express bus, those kind of things. And the reason I'm saying it doesn't make sense is because federal funds are distributed with respect to what ridership we could get on opening day. And if we built something and then we had the ridership of current, we don't have the density and population to support those rail options at this time. Next slide, please. And something our region has wondered for a long time is really what will this cost us? And what we're hoping to provide from this phase 2 study is some ranges of costs for the various modes of high capacity transportation. And those will be based on, as I mentioned before, communities of similar sizes who have undertaken these projects recently. They'll provide some different funding models. I think we're all familiar that Sound Transit used an RTA and used a vehicle fee. So, those sort of options. There's obviously transit is often supported by sales tax. So they'll explore some of those funding models. And then options for who supplies the service, whether it be Intercity Transit or another organization in our region. And then a cost estimate per person and per household for Thurston Region residents, which I think a lot of us have been trying to get to for years. Is, a lot of times in the legislature, we talk about how it makes sense for, is it a good investment for each person in that region to invest in the high capacity transportation? And what we're seeing from our current density patterns is that at this point, it probably doesn't, but density changes and things like that could change that in the future also. And then the ridership versus cost comparison that I was just talking about, and also tying into other efficiencies of developing the high capacity transportation modes. We all know that light rail is eventually supposed to get to DuPont. And, does it make sense to try and tie in with that? Does it make sense to do other express bus service that would tie in with that? Those kind of options. Next slide, please. And I know there's too much text on this slide, but so many things I did just want to call out that we are going to learn as part of this phase 2 work. I mentioned collaborating with other providers to see what might make sense for efficiencies, and working with the different communities, business, freight, tribes, transit, vulnerable communities, and just seeing how whatever modes we go forth with would impact their communities. And really provide those costs and timeframes, just because I think that's something our community has been asking for. I know Intercity Transit mentioned in some of their work for their long range plan that that's something the community wanted to know more about. So hopefully those are some answers we can provide from this study. And just also remind the public of what we have. I recently was able to give a presentation to a Kiwanis Club about how to get around the region without a car, and it's challenging. I will be the first to admit it. The options are out there and they're various, but it can be challenging. And just like if you get a flat tire in your car, it's good to have a plan B. But it's also, they're not all in one place, and there are all sorts of different options if you get, a little bit north of us up to near SeaTac and things like that. So it was an interesting presentation for me to realize, man, there's a lot out there, but you have to know about it. And then informing the design of the I-5 through Mounts Road through Tumwater, and that's something we've talked about so much as a council and TPB, and just looking at HOV options for that region, or for that whole entire corridor. And that, I know we've made that a priority for this organization. Next slide, please. And I do want to make a quick note about our timeline. And phase 1 is complete and the final report was issued. And phase 2 is currently underway. We had a deliverable to the legislature on December 1st. It was a study outline and recommendations of what we'll find in this phase 2. And that's most of what I presented to you today. Also happy to share that if it hasn't been shared yet. And then for phase 2, we did get money in the supplemental state budget. And so technically that would mean we have to finish the report, the phase 2 work by June 2023. And that's a quick turnaround for anyone. So we have asked for an extension to the end of 2023, but we won't know if we get that until the end of the legislative session. So hoping for end of 2023, but there's a possibility it could be June of 2023. Next slide, please. And that's all I have today. And I'm happy to entertain questions. And I know I have Chris Breland on the line. I saw him, and Karen has been here through both phases of the project. I know she has some good intel also, and Katrina Van Every as well. So happy to take any questions.
Can you stop sharing? Yeah, great. Any questions? Don?
It's not really a question, but you sort of cast Amtrak as a given. But it turns out of late Amtrak, the key to Catalyst Amtrak was the deal that volunteers would man the station. And a good friend of mine is one of those volunteers, and they are in sheer panic because they've lost 20% of their volunteers because of COVID. And I know Intercity Transit is helping to publicize that, but it's an important factor for everybody to be aware of. Because as I understand it, the deal with Amtrak stopping there was that we would staff the station with volunteers. And apparently some of the challenges are for the late evening northbound trains. The volunteers try to have 2 people there. One person is not comfortable, particularly if it's a woman is not comfortable being there alone. And those are the kind of things that I'm sure are discouraging things. I don't want to affect your study, but I think that's just something everybody should be aware of.
Don, thank you so much for pointing that out. I was an Amtrak volunteer for 5 years when I was in my 20s, and I was the youngest person by about 30 years. And it's a wonderful place to be. And I encourage anybody on this call to volunteer. It's wonderful. And it's a great time to interact with the public, and it's lovely. And I feel like you set me up for a pitch, so I had to.
Okay. And spread the word. And I think
Yes.
Brent from Manzanares is sort of the catching point for Interstate Transit that puts you and anybody interested in touch with the volunteer group.
Well, that's really good information, Don, and I think we should all do our best to get the word out about volunteerism there. Danny?
Michelle actually has her hand up before me.
Okay.
Veronica, were those numbers about the light rail based on current ridership or proposed ridership?
And I might tag Chris Breland here, but my understanding is that they're based on current ridership.
Okay. And the reason I asked that question is that when I did commute to Seattle, I know I would have taken light rail had it been available.
Yep.
But instead I drove. So I was wondering if part of the study might be a survey to, Thurston County residents, that if light rail were available, would they use that? And kind of have a proposal of, where some light rail stations might be at and where they might connect to, just to get an idea of ridership. Because even though we don't have the population that like areas like Seattle do, we have a unique population in how we approach the world around us. And a lot of people in this area, I find, are more climate conscious than in other areas. And so if that, if the residents were presented an option of light rail and what the cost would be and all those things, I would think that might make a difference. So that's just all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Danny?
Yeah, I have a question about light rail as well. And, I hear what you say in terms of, what federal funding can go towards with population density and all of that. But, a lot of the conversation, especially from our own Congresswoman Strickland, is connecting Seattle to Portland. And we're just kind of in the middle of that. So how does that play into the conversation around federal funding with two incredibly dense areas where we would just be a stop along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know that I have the ability to answer that. I know in my work as with Amtrak, whenever anybody wanted to add a stop, you also have to consider, and from Intercity Transit can speak to this also, just that anytime you want to add a stop, you're adding time, and that's not what people want. They don't want to add time. Those people going to Seattle and Portland, as much as we want to stop in Olympia. I remember this with Sumner, and I remember this with Stanwood on the Amtrak Cascades line. It took many years to get those lines because they really had to make the infrastructure so it would be a very quick stop. I don't know anything about those current plans. I don't, Karen or Chris.
I can speak to that a bit because we have had some discussions with Congresswoman Strickland's office about this, and she is a big proponent of the ultra high speed rail from Vancouver, BC to Portland, and so when she's thinking of that connection down south, that is an area of emphasis right now, the ultra high speed rail. And I think the challenge there, if that continues to go forward, because they did include 175 million, I believe that's the correct number, in Move Ahead Washington to further study this ultra high speed rail. And I think that the challenge for our region will be, as Veronica mentioned, to argue for a stop in Olympia, because what their original plans are is they want to truly minimize the stops between Vancouver, BC, Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland so that it stays ultra high speed. But that is a state and federal effort that is somewhat separate from this, but certainly plays into this. If that continues to move forward, then, and we can argue for a stop in Olympia, that could make things more realistic in a much shorter time frame, because it's not just serving our region, it's serving the whole metro region from Vancouver, BC to Portland, Oregon.
Well, and if I may contribute something to the argument of why there should be a stop in Olympia is it'd be really interesting to see the numbers for ridership during or potential ridership during session. That's access to state government that a lot of people don't have. I mean, more and more because of virtual stuff, but that face-to-face interaction with legislators and stuff like that is something that most people don't have access to in Washington. And having a stop in Olympia, I think that adds to the argument, and it'd be interesting to see what numbers might look like during those particular months of the year to bolster that argument.
Yeah, I agree. It'll have to be a higher speed type train for that to, I think, really work for us. Because if you took light rail from here up to Seattle, it'd take it 2 hours, with all the stops along the way.
Driving there takes 2 hours.
I know. So a higher speed train seems like it would definitely be a little more appealing for some. But this is a really, this is something that we hear all the time. For those of us who've been on Transportation Policy Board, this is something that the public wants. So we are always looking at it, and the numbers always come back the same way, right? We don't quite have the population to support it. And once we've looked into the numbers a little bit, it's really, really expensive to do it, but it's still on the top of the wish list of everyone here. So that's why we'll keep looking at it, and keep looking for opportunities and see what we can do. But I have a feeling, unless our population dramatically increased, it's just not quite penciling out for us yet. But
right,
we definitely want it. Everyone wants it.
Yep.
Is there anyone else? Then we'll let you get your kids off to school.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So next up on our agenda is the call for projects review.
Good morning, Transportation Policy Board members. So here we are, last meeting of 2022, and this is a great opportunity for you to reflect on our call for projects process. So I just kind of want to briefly pave the way a little before your conversation to provide some background and context. This revision of our call for projects process actually kicked off with the TPB's retreat in September 2019, and staff has been really working behind the scenes for quite some time. And over the last year, we really started digging in, engaging you, the policy board, and we're thankful that for your leadership and providing some guidance on this process. And so part of today's agenda item is for you to reflect on this process, what worked well, what could use improvement to help assist staff to identify some specific actionable items to improve our next funding cycle. But before we talk about your conversation, let's just talk about what happened this year with our 2022 process. We received a total of 21 proposals from 9 applicants. We actually had about 19 million in STBG proposals plus 4.5 million in contingency proposals submitted. With your recommendation, the council approved it and awarded $11.3 million to high priority projects that will start obligating in federal fiscal year 2025 through 2027. So a total of 8 projects awarded, and we have nearly 10.5 million in backup projects that are added to the contingency list. Just a reminder, with your recommendation, which the council approved, we funded 2 transportation alternative awards. You can see on the slide here, Intercity Transit was our urban medium award for $660,408. That will fund 2 years of the walk and roll program out to starting in 2027 through 2029, and $225,000 to the city of Tenino to allow them to do the preliminary and engineering and design to extend a trail from Tenino City Park out to West Tenino city limits. And then we have a total of 6 STBG grant awards that are awarded. For the rural proposal, Thurston County received a little over $1 million for construction of the old Highway 99 and Tilley Road intersection improvements to allow a left turn lane and some shoulder widening and lighting at that intersection to make it safer. In our urban small category, the city of Yelm received $850,000 to do preliminary and engineering and design for the Roton Road Northwest Improvements Project, which will be a complete streets project between the SR 510 bypass and down to Yelm's commercial district. And Thurston County received $864,000 for the old Highway 99 at Sargent and 201st Avenue intersection improvements project. This provides some intersection turning movement management, as well as a roundabout at Sargent Road and sidewalks. Within our North Urban Core, or urban medium area, 3 projects were funded. $735,250 to Intercity Transit to do the engineering design phase for their East Martin Way roundabout, and nearly 3.9 or almost 4 million to the city of Lacey for College Street Corridor Improvements Phase 3 for the right-of-way, and nearly $3 million to the city of Tumwater for the X Street roundabout construction. I just want to point out on the slide too, you can see a share of transportation alternatives funds that were available that were awarded to these projects for eligible expenditures on these projects. So a lot of process details that you approved with the revised process. Just want to remind you, overall, the process objectives were, with the revision, was to provide a more direct tie between our performance goals and targets, making sure we have a competitive process, making sure that our eligibility and evaluation criteria was clear and transparent and easy to understand among the applicants. And most importantly, we want to award high priority projects and continue positioning the region to be eligible for redistributed funding or sanction funding if that's to come along. We have a point-based evaluation process with efficient use of federal funds, equity, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and the neighborhood centers, urban corridors from Sustainable Thurston. Each of those were worth 2 points, with the exception of Sustainable Thurston, which only applied to projects in the urban medium area. And then you identified project priorities, maintaining safety, multimodal efficiency, maintenance and preservation, but adding active transportation, planning and resiliency. And something we couldn't change this year that was new, we had new geographic allocations, rural, urban, small, urban, medium, plus flexible, which could be awarded anywhere. And this was the first time we also implemented some form of funding caps for the urban and small, the rural and urban small areas. We just had maximum awards based on what the allocations were set at. For the urban medium area, we established a funding cap that an applicant could not exceed 33% of the urban medium allocation for the first 2 funding cycles of 3 consecutive cycles. And then contingency awards were excluded from caps. And we do have one applicant that is really on the cusp. That's the City of Lacey with its College Street corridor improvements project is on the cusp of that urban medium funding cap. And so today we're to talk about all of these elements. This is all fair game for your discussion today. I suggest you focus in on your role with the Transportation Policy Board, but also a critical role with the Technical Advisory Committee and performing a technical review. In fact, they're going to be performing a debriefing tomorrow. Talk about the staff recommendation. You could talk about your process. We know that you didn't have a lot of time to review the projects and discuss them, and you never got around to that tie-baking process because staff offered a recommendation that appeared to work this time around. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about public comments. Ms. Karen Mesmer submitted public comments. They were emailed to you yesterday, and I would be remiss if I didn't take the time to highlight what Ms. Mesmer shared with you. And so I just want to try to accurately represent what I think were the core components of her feedback to you. That is that our process should take a look at what's in our regional transportation plan and look at the goals to help inform and guide our evaluation criteria. Specifically around transportation alternatives grant funding, that funding shouldn't be used to fund complete street projects, that a roadway project, especially in the urban areas, should include all of those multimodal elements, and that the transportation alternatives funding really is a unique opportunity to fund standalone bicycle pedestrian projects to really help move the needle in supporting active transportation. Third, identifying a regional trail priority project and coordinating with the partners to queue that up for the next call for projects process. You've had an approved regional trails plan since 2007. One's in the works that you will receive a presentation on today. So it's important that the region continue investing in trails. And lastly, because active transportation and transportation related TDM type projects are a funding priority, there really should be some mechanism to measure how much of a project actually invests in active transportation and score those projects accordingly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Andy, for your discussion. Staff has asked the officers of the TPB to kind of ask some questions about the process to provide staff feedback. Andy, I'm hoping you and the officers have the questions, so I'm going to stop sharing and just listen now.
Thank you. First of all, I think Karen, excuse me, I think Karen had some really good comments, public comments. The one thing that we need to look at is every time we put more restrictions, though, on these fundings, it does mean there's going to be less projects that are going to be available for that funding. And one of the things that we saw during this last time was a little bit pushback from some jurisdictions about, hey, these are hard, these are rare dollars to get. And anytime you sort of intercede with our normal plans for what they have in their pipeline, maybe some of their projects that are important projects that need to be funded but don't score very well, what happens to those projects? So that's just something to think about as we're going through this process. But when I look at the question and how we evaluate from here, it's really sort of we're breaking 3 main areas. What were our expectations going into this process, and did it meet those expectations? What worked and what didn't work? That's sort of a second type of question. Then of course, what should we do different next time? And so let's start off with the first one. First question is what were your expectations going into this process, and did it meet your expectations or not? And we can maybe have a little bit of conversation around that. One of the things that I pointed out to staff is that this is actually the first time a lot of people on the Transportation Policy Board went through any process at all. We have a newer board as compared to sometimes in the past where we've had a little more seniority, same sort of people on the board that's gone through several of these projects. So I don't know if for some of us, we don't have a lot to compare it to in the past. So you don't know how it worked compared to last time, what worked, what didn't work better. But throwing it out there, what were your expectations as we were going to fund these projects, and did it meet your expectations? You want to start? Renee, and then we'll go to Jessica.
So it's hard to believe, but it is true that we started talking about this way back in 2019. And I really appreciated the comments that were submitted by Karen Mesmer, because it took me back to that conversation and staying true to the goals that we set out during that early conversation. And I'm not sure that I had any specific expectations going into this process, except that we would remain true to those goals. And I think I think my expectations maybe changed a little bit when I started seeing the kinds of projects that were being submitted. And there's only so much that we can control, and the jurisdictions control what they're submitting. But ultimately, I think we did a reasonably good job of holding true to the work that we did back in 2019. And maybe what we might think about for the future is doing a more in-depth review with jurisdictions about exactly what we're looking for. I feel good about the process we went through this year. It was new, it was different. But overall, I think it was healthy.
Great.
How are you this morning?
Jessica?
Okay, so as a new board member, I had no expectations. Obviously, I came in thinking, okay, what are we doing? And I was pleasantly surprised to see there was a process in place. For me, it just felt rushed, and I'm still new and still getting it will take me a while to get my feet under me on terms of projects and what our goals are. But I thought the process overall was surprisingly good. I was not expecting that, so that's good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Travis, and then Danny.
Yeah, so also as a new board member, I didn't have any expectations. And I probably would have scored all the projects and maybe ended up with the same result we got. So there were no disappointments there, but in the future, I'd like to see the project scoring process be a bit more collaborative, even if that happens offline outside of meetings. if there's a way that we can all submit scores, maybe we all end up with the same results. But just to be able to provide impact on how everything ranked would be something I'd like to see.
That's a good suggestion. We did see how staff scored it, but we didn't have a chance to score it ourselves. So it's a good recommendation. Danny?
Well, yeah, we didn't see how staff scored it when the decision was being made. We got that information after the fact. So, I had expected a little bit more collaboration. We had talked about the process we'd like to use if there was a tie. And we had a staff recommendation instead. And as Travis said, maybe we would have landed in the same place anyway. But it felt rushed and it wasn't quite aligned with what we had discussed we were going to do. And there's comparing to how this has happened in the past with the Transportation Policy Board, but I also think about other bodies that decide or make recommendations, I should say, on how grant dollars are spent. And I think of the Regional Housing Council where staff do sit down and parse through the applications and score them. But one of the things that we've done in the past with the RHC is having a subcommittee, a funding work group that sits down, looks at those staff recommendations very closely. That way it doesn't take the time of the entire board to sit down and look at everything. But there is more involvement from the representatives on this board to be able to evaluate staff's work, maybe make some changes if changes are warranted. And then make that recommendation to the Transportation Policy Board. That's a more collaborative way of going about things that we could consider in the future.
Chair Pete Komet in the room has a comment.
Great, go for it, Pete.
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to say a couple of things here. I think at the end of the day, we ended up with a good list of projects, but I guess my expectation going in is part of this money, it's pretty rare to get trail only funding. And we really didn't have a choice of a good trail project, I thought. Was some design work that's being done, but I think it was an opportunity missed, frankly. That money's pretty rare when it comes along. And so I would hope jurisdictions could put their heads together and figure out a good trail component project that would fall within the funding cap. The other thing I would mention, I'm surprised Danny didn't, is of course Olympia didn't get any funding out of this process. And I think it's important that this board keep that in mind on the next cycle. They are our biggest jurisdiction, or almost, I guess, right there with Lacey, and I think it's important that they get funding through this process as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny, you have something?
Yeah, well, I'll just to follow up with what Pete said, since he was surprised I didn't mention it. I did mention it at the last meeting when we made the decision that something that's new in this call for projects is the multi-cycle caps. And so I'll just say what I said at the last meeting is we need to safeguard that criteria that we established there around the multi-funding cycle caps to be fair among all the jurisdictions. I agree with the decisions that were made. I think that the projects that were funded from that urban medium category serve more people than what Olympia had brought forward. And so, I'm not upset about any decisions, but looking into future funding cycles, we really do need to safeguard that to maintain the intent of the funding cap that we had set.
For sure. And I know next time Lacey's not going to be applying for it. We took our turn, and now hopefully Olympia has a big project, and we'll get similar funding next time. So is there any other discussion on this before we go on to what worked and what didn't work? Although we're sort of discussing what worked and what didn't work along in this process as well. So it's from here on out, it's what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do better next time. And I think keep that conversation going. We obviously did miss a step. And I talked about it at last meeting. And it's that step where it's the scoring step in the collaboration that happens so we're all on the same page, that we all agree with how it got scored. And maybe, the electeds could do a little more of a deep dive on adding a couple more points, as Karen Mesmer has pointed out, just to making sure that we are meeting the intent within each of our tips as well. But that's going to take some really deep dives. What you almost have to have happen is the jurisdictions at the beginning of this process to come in and talk about some of the major projects they're trying to move forward, how it meets the regional priorities and their city's priorities, and talk about those projects. So we have an understanding of what projects are out there. Then you do the call for projects, right? And then we get to discuss, okay, out of those projects, what do we believe are meeting the intent of the regional priorities and the city's priorities, help score it that way. And then it goes on as we do. That will take two more steps, right? Because we on occasion hear what's going on, what's the county's top projects, what's the Olympia's top projects, what's Lacey's top projects, but we don't hear that on a regular basis. And that's something, unless we get that information, this policy board receives that information as well, and we're more up to date on what's going on regionally and within the jurisdictions, it's gonna be really hard for us to be making some of those decisions. And so, we will need some more information along the way if we're gonna try to make sure we are meeting the intent of what way back in 2019 saying, hey, we need to focus these dollars more on our priorities. I also do want to say that, we've talked before about setting aside dollars for our trail system, and yet we haven't quite made that decision to do that yet. I mean, that is how we were able to do major trail improvements, bridging the gap, and other things in years past. Is we've said this is a major regional priority. Let's start making sure there's an ongoing funding source to make sure we can do those. That is a decision that we can continue to make, and improve our trail system, which I think at this point needs maintenance and preservation as well. And it's really starting to fall apart if you're starting to use the trail system lately. And we need a plan, and let's hopefully right after this, we're going to hear a trails plan update. But we definitely need a funding source to meet the maintenance and preservation and expansion of our trail system. And so this could be one of those sources that we just set aside. Danny?
We keep referencing this retreat that happened in 2019. I wasn't a part of that, and I've been on this board for 3 years. Maybe we should talk about doing another retreat so that everybody can get oriented to the work that has happened in the place and go into the next process just a little bit more grounded in, and carry that work forward, modify as need be. I know it's been like pandemic since then, but I think we're getting to a place where it could be a good idea to do that again.
I agree. That you say 2019, man, that felt like it was like 2015 or 2017. That felt like it was a long time ago. And so, but I guess it did kickstart this work where we're starting to look at how we knew that we needed to come up with a different process. And so how were we going to start that different process? We brought a lot of people in, and it was a great retreat. It'd be wonderful just to have an update for that. And I think that's something maybe we should do early next year as well. Can you give us the timeline on the next call for projects as well?
We'd be looking at around early spring 2024.
Okay, so we have next year to sort of prepare a little bit more. Okay. Is there anything else from the Transportation Policy Board on this subject? Obviously, what I'm really interested in is from the technical advisory group, what they thought worked and what didn't work, because they're in the weeds in this stuff way more than we are, and they're the experts. You know, we're just the policy wonks on our side. And so I really want to know how they felt it worked and get a report back on that. Don, you have something?
A couple things. Number one, I really echo your the notion about some sort of a retreat. The process was put together is frankly very highly competitive. Everybody's got to do their darndest to do a good application. And the collaboration part would be very helpful to sort of moderate that or make that more educational. The last thing I would like to say, how did staff feel about the mad exercise they had to go through? Were there any streamlinings they could see? Maybe not today, but sometime. Is there ways they think they can improve the process?
Yeah, I agree. Part of what we need to get back from this, from the technical advisory group, and also from TRPC staff on, they saw that worked, what didn't work. We'd like to hear from you as well on these same questions, and go from there.
Chair, if I may quickly on that point, is one thing from a staff perspective that I'd like to say is want to thank the policy board and council for their flexibility on this and going through with this process. We did have one big new wrinkle, which was that designation of rural, urban, small, urban, medium, and our flex. That was, for those that haven't done this before, that was brand new, which put some more boxes and more constraints on how we program these funds. So going into the next one, really good feedback that I think we can work with the TAC and figure out how to incorporate obviously more review time, more collaboration in the next one, but we also will be more prepared for these designations of rural, urban, small, urban, medium, because that was a bit of a wild card that was handed to us not long before we started the call for projects process from the federal government reauthorization.
Great. Well, I think we have some good information here. I do want to put it out there, and Pete and other people can attest to this. At the end of the day, what a lot of this comes down to is a math problem, right? We have a certain pot of dollars. There's projects out there, all good projects, by the way, all important projects. So how do you split up those dollars and make sure the projects that can go forward, go forward? It's really hard. And that's why the staff recommendation this time around was absolutely necessary, because we just didn't have the time to go through and show the math side of things. If we were sitting here all, trying to do this on a calculator, well, here's this project, we wouldn't have, we would have needed all morning, we wouldn't have been able to adjourn till early afternoon or something like that. So the math side of things is really important at the end of the day. You're trying to put dollars to projects, and that requires a lot. And so I did appreciate this time around, considering the timing. We had no choice. I mean, we ran out of time too, to have that recommendation. And I do think they were all great projects. I really do. They were really good projects. But I think being a little more prepared next time and spreading it out a little bit more will I think make us all feel a little more comfortable that we got it right at the end. So. Okay, anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you. Then let's hear about our regional trails plan update.
Good morning, everyone. So there's been some discussion already about trails, and so I'm going to be talking about the trails plan update that we're going through right now. And so just to place this in context, you know, regional trail planning is not a requirement. This is not something that we are required to do per state and federal guidelines or requirements. This is something that as a region, we have decided to do. And that stems back even to the 2007 plan. So there's broad public interest in shared use trails and our regional trails network, as you've already been discussing today. And there are linkages to a variety of plans with regard to our regional trails. So Washington State Active Transportation Plan, our Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan, our Regional Transportation Plan, and our Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan. We are kind of narrowing the focus of our regional trails plan. So the 2007 plan is fairly broad, but we're going a little bit narrower and really focusing on that shared use trail network and understanding how that functions and how it can function better. So today, the Thurston region has 57 miles of existing trails. You can see those trails in this map on the left, and they are highlighted in green. So these are the trails that are actively utilized and intended to be utilized by people. The 14 existing trails are owned by 9 different entities, and they're managed by 8 different agencies. Right now, in 2022, more than 37,000 people live within a half mile of the existing trails network. By 2045, that number is expected to balloon to more than 82,000 people. That means that 1 in 5 county residents in 2045 will live within a half mile of just the existing trails network. So while we started this update process in 2019, it really hit the ground in 2021. The pandemic kind of threw some things off. But in 2021, we launched the update process in earnest with that regional trail survey to the community. And from the start of this update process, we've really been working with a trails advisory work group and trail managers and others to understand the issues surrounding or impacting our trail network. So in 2021 and on through now and into the future, we are doing outreach to various groups, and we are in the process of drafting this update. We expect to have a draft ready for public consumption and your review in the spring. We are looking to have a final plan adopted by TRPC, hopefully in the summer. As I mentioned, there's been a number of people involved in this plan so far, or this update so far, but really what's fed into this is our 2007 plan. It is a good starting point, and there's a lot of information that you'll see carrying forward based on what we've been able to draft so far. We've done an inventory of trail facilities, reaching out to trail managers, understanding what exactly they have on the ground and what they hope to have on the ground in the future. We did that community survey back in 2021. We've also issued a trail operator questionnaire to understand the things that they worry about that are impacting their ability to manage, maintain, and grow their trail networks. We have a trail advisory work group that we're working with, and we also have looked at jurisdiction plans, whether it's a comprehensive plan or a bicycle and pedestrian plan. We are looking at the feedback and the pieces to those plans and how they can feed into this overall regional network or trail plan. So again, back in 2021, we did that community survey in February and March of last year. And that survey was promoted through Facebook, email, and signs placed along the region's trails. More than 1,200 people participated in the survey, which included 14 questions on use and convenience, safety and security, planning priorities, values, and community engagement. A lot of what we heard from the community wasn't really a surprise. Most people who use the region's trails do so for recreation. And there are people who also use it for transportation purposes. They are more like who use the trails are more likely to drive to the trail than access it on foot or by bike. So those trailheads are really important. And parking at those trailheads is really important. Companionship increases user sense of safety and security on the trail. And cleaning up impacted areas, repairing and removing vandalized facilities, and patrolling the trails all help users feel safer when they're accessing that amenity, that important community asset. One of the questions we asked was the types of trail investments respondents thought the region should plan for. And what we learned is that regardless of income, gender, race, or ethnicity, the top 4 priorities were consistent for respondents. That included maintaining our existing trail infrastructure, expanding the trails within the Thurston region, enhancing trail-related infrastructure, and really improving those neighborhood access to trails. So in the draft that we are preparing, there are these different parts. We're focusing on the vision and goals and policies for this presentation and this discussion because they really impact any recommendations that come out of this plan and how funding can be applied. There was a lot of discussion on the previous item about setting up some sort of pot of funding for a real good trail project. And so that's something that we would need to be paying attention to as we move forward in drafting this. So the vision that we have identified for the trails plan or our trails network is really carrying forward from the 2007 plan. And it's also consistent with plans adopted by our region's trail managing agencies. And that's that the Thurston region's trail network is accessible, expandable, and effectively maintained, that the network provides safe and enjoyable recreation and active transportation for all users, connecting all Thurston County communities. And there are some key statements or keywords in this, this vision that feeds into the goals that we'll talk about next. And that's accessibility and connectivity. It's expanding the network, looking to ensure it's maintained well, that it's a safe and enjoyable experience for people. So those keywords really feed well into these goals. From the vision, we identified 5 goals for the Regional Trails Network. A connected and accessible network, a user-friendly network, one that's safe and secure, one that is a collaborative effort in maintaining and growing, and that it is a well-maintained network. To date, we've identified more than 25 policies intended to help our region meet the goals and vision for the Trails Network that we've identified in this draft so far. We're still working with the advisory work group to refine these, but the following slides provide examples of the types of policies that will be included in the full draft plan, which you'll review at a future date. That first one, a connected and accessible network. We're really looking at this network being accessible and expandable, effectively connecting communities, destinations, and other transportation facilities. So we want to look at those community connections, those neighborhood tie-ins and business and other community assets. We want to look at planning for those future connections. So even if it's not going to be built in the next 5 years or 10 years, we want to make sure that we are planning into the future for those. Multimodal connections. So how are we connecting to sidewalks and transit and other facilities that offer other ways for people to travel our community and beyond? And then also looking at the environmental considerations that go along with creating this network and growing it. The map that you see here is showing the existing network. Those are the green lines, as well as planned and proposed trails. Those are blue lines. So we want a user-friendly network. We want a trail system that functions well for different types of users. And so we'll look at ways that our trails are designed and how they're ADA accessible. We'll look at accessibility for different types of users. So whether you are a parent with a couple of kids, or you're walking your dog, or you are riding your bike, or you are jogging, we want to make sure that the trail system functions for all these different types of users. And in rural areas, we also want to look at, is there a tie-in for equestrian users? Navigation and wayfinding. How are you finding your way to the trail? How are you finding your way to community assets off the trail? As well as how do you know where you are on the trail? Is there a consistency across jurisdictional boundaries so that you have, as a user, that experience isn't about necessarily the portion of the trail you're on in Lacey, but it's about the entire trail as it crosses into Lacey, Tumwater, Thurston County, and Olympia. And what trail amenities make sense? So those trailheads, those benches, trash receptacles, all of these things play a part in creating a user-friendly network. We want a safe and secure experience. We want it to be safe for everyone who uses it, those who operate and maintain it. And that means we do need to look at managing users, how fast people are going on the trail, courteousness, etc. We want that experience to be good for everyone. How are we looking at mitigating, avoiding, and preventing hazards? So that could be anything from tree roots to other incidents that happen. We want to be able to manage access to the trail, but also to property off the trail. So ensuring that people aren't going beyond into private property. We want to make sure that people are able, or emergency services are able to respond to incidents, whether that is police or ambulance or other emergency service providers. And then we need to figure out how best to handle those trail disruptions and closures so that it's safe and the public understands well in advance what's happening. Trail building is a collaborative effort, and we want trail managing agencies to be able to work collaboratively to build and maintain that network. So what can we do to support transportation and recreation programs, economic development opportunities? What can we do to foster that regional collaboration? And how can we improve engaging the public in those processes and those efforts? And last, but certainly not least, a well-maintained network. We want a network that is well-maintained in a cost-effective manner. So we really need to have that conversation about how we can't forget about maintenance. And we want to maintain trails like a transportation asset, whether a jurisdiction has trails as part of their parks plan or their transportation plan. We want to look at it as a transportation asset because that on its face really is what it is. We also want to enable those stewardship opportunities. We hear from the public in the last few years quite frequently about wanting to be part of the solution and taking ownership over those trails. And so how can we help encourage those stewardship opportunities and break down those barriers that prevent it? And then we want to find ways to minimize maintenance and life cycle costs. And again, jurisdictions work really well together trying to figure that out, but are there other things that we can do to enhance that? So our next steps are to really finalize the draft and review it. We'll continue to work with the region's trail managers and advisory work group to revise and refine the draft plan, including those goals and the policies that are associated with them. Once that process is complete, we'll bring it forward to the public for review. This includes holding a public meeting and providing a public comment period. Once we have feedback from the public, we'll bring it back to the policy board for a recommendation and finally present it to council for consideration of adoption. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
Here I see Michelle Murray has her hand up.
Great, Michelle.
Yes, are you working with any groups on the ADA aspects of the project?
Paul, can you speak to who is included in the Trail Advisory Work Group?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so we have Morningside represented at our advisory work group. And we also have a physical therapist from Providence St. Peter Hospital who specializes in sports physical therapy.
And anyone specific to ADA accessibility, or just those two pieces?
Those are our two primary representatives in addition to the jurisdiction's trail managers.
Is there a way to for someone to get involved in that aspect of it?
Certainly, we're open to any suggestions and inviting others to the conversation.
Then I am formally requesting to be a part of that, because as someone who has used the trail in the past, I don't live near the trail now, can definitely say it is not ADA friendly. And as somebody who uses mobility aids like wheelchairs, and someday hopefully my enclosed scooter will arrive, you know, being able to use the trails, being out on the open road is scary, and to be able to use the trails would be much more preferable. And one thing I've found is that it doesn't seem like wheelchair users get asked enough questions about how things work. So I would like to be a part of that.
Okay.
And if you could just let me know how to get a hold of you, or
We will follow up with you. Thank you for volunteering.
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Don?
I just wanted to, have you thought about anything more you could do with user education? I mean, we've all been on a trail and going at our pace and being passed by some high-speed group of 7 or 8 riders that don't even seem concerned about you. And there's probably limited opportunity, but I would urge you to, on the maps and everything you distribute, to encourage people to consider everybody else is on the trail.
Thank you.
Yeah, trail etiquette is really important for sure. Travis?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the map of the proposed trail network is available elsewhere, and if you can provide any insight onto how that was planned. As a frequent trail user, I'm just very curious about what a future larger trail network could look like. So I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, so the map that I shared on one of the slides with both the green lines, which were the existing trails, and the blue lines, which are proposed or planned. So the jurisdictions all have trails that are planned. So a perfect example of that is the Gate Belmore Trail. It's definitely a planned trail and is intended to be constructed into the future. But there are also other trails that are at this stage just proposed. So things that no one's committed to and don't have in their plans, but would make good connections and good sense from that perspective. So that was developed in-house, but also working with the trail managers. Anything to add to that, Paul?
That's it.
Yeah, and we can definitely share a draft version of that if you'd like with the after meeting summary.
Thank you.
Great. I think that really the most important part of this going forward is the funding, dedicated funding. And what does that look like? I mean, are we going to just rely on federal funds to, for preservation and maintenance and expansion, or are we going to look at other sources of funding? I do think this is a high priority for our region and for our communities, for multiple reasons, and as I point out, people use the trails to commute, plus recreation, so on and so forth. But as I mentioned before, man, our trail system seems like it's in disrepair right now. And so it'd be really nice to see what the future maintenance and preservation schedule looks like, and how we're going to pay for it as a part of this recommendation coming back, or, you know, when we get through the open house and so on and so forth. Because I do think there is at least some interest, from what I can tell, of Transportation Policy Board looking to set aside some dollars, some regional dollars, to make sure that this happens. Any comments from anyone else?
It looks like John O'Callaghan has his hand up.
Yeah, John.
Years ago, we were looking at this basically in the same light that we are now. Back then, the big discussion was maintenance. Leaves all over the place, especially when it's wet, stuff like that, and nobody knew how they were going to do it and which jurisdiction is responsible for what part of it. You know, if some of it's in the city, some of it's in the county, how it's all going to be taken care of, overgrowth, stuff like that. But we never really went any further than that. And this conversation just made me think, we have what they do is adopt a highway along, you know, and they get to some of the clubs like Rotarians and Kiwanis and Alliance Club, and they adopt about a mile, and every couple of months they go out and they clean it up and that kind of stuff. I don't think I've ever heard at any of the different groups that I've ever been involved with, this board or anybody from this area talk about the trails to them to try to get that kind of volunteer involvement. That would give us, get people more involved in the trails to start with, but would also save us a lot of money that we can actually, as the road itself starts to degrade, go in there and patch it up, or just replace the parts that need to be replaced, because we're not paying for the lawn maintenance or cutting down branches and stuff like that, and just keeping the leaves off so that it is safe. That might be something worthwhile, going to all the different organizations, the chambers and the club, all the different volunteer clubs, because there are tons of people that are involved in all of those different clubs. How many different Lions clubs do we have in Thurston County? I know there's one in Tenino. There's about 4 or 5 of them up here in North County, maybe more. And with that group, there's at least a couple of hundred people. You know, out of that couple of hundred people, 10%, 3 to 10% is going to do all of the work. If we can get to that 10% mark, that's out of that 200, that's 20 people taking care of little sections of the trails throughout the year. And
I agree with you, John. I think a part of this should be an outreach for volunteerism on the trail. I'm sure that's been looked at a little bit, but it'd be really nice to hear more about what those opportunities are, and maybe some education and some outreach on how we do adopt a trail section.
Yeah, see, that's just it. That would be that's what you call it. You call it adopt the trail instead of adopt the highway. The program's already set. Just go to whoever's in charge of adopt the highway, get their plans and adopt it to what we could use you. Easy peasy. Have it done in less than 6 months or less.
Thank you. Yeah, there is definitely a lot of community interest in being involved in solutions. So.
Any other comments? Okay. Well, all we have left on our agenda is outside community reports. Got anything real quick, Danny?
I don't, but just a heads up that I won't be able to continue to represent TRPC at the Puget Sound Regional Council. It's the time commitment during the workday is just too much. I missed the last meeting. So heads up. Okay, we will discuss that next meeting, where I'll put it out there if we're recommendations. Anyone wants to step up, and we'll talk a little about that more. And next meeting. With that, we have reached the end of our agenda. It's great to see everyone this morning, bright and early. So without objection, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Conversation earlier, which is